The escalating tensions between Russia, Ukraine, and the West. Tensions between Russia, Ukraine, and Western nations have escalated significantly in recent days, with developments on multiple fronts. On one hand, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky held high-profile meetings with international allies in Brussels yesterday. Images emerged of Zelensky being welcomed directly into the residence of Dutch Prime Minister Mark Rutte, where they discussed a range of critical issues. However, public statements to the press appeared limited, as if Zelensky's hosts preferred to avoid letting him speak freely in front of cameras. Meanwhile, on the ground, another attack involving Western-supplied missiles was reported on Russian territory. Footage has surfaced showing a British-made Storm Shadow cruise missile heading toward a target deep within the Russian Federation. These missiles, previously deployed by Ukrainian forces alongside American ATACMS missiles and other Western-supplied munitions, have recently been used to target Russian infrastructure near and within the nation's internationally recognized borders. As these developments unfolded, explosions were reported in the skies above Taganrog, near Rostov-on-Don in the Azov Sea region. This area has recently been the target of U.S.-supplied ATACMS missiles, raising concerns that NATO-backed strikes may again hit Russia from Ukrainian territory. Alternatively, these incidents could involve drones aimed at Taganrog. Russian air defense systems reportedly engaged multiple aerial threats, prompting speculation about whether these were Storm Shadow missiles, ATACMS, or another type of Ukrainian munition. The suspected target in this latest assault was an industrial plant known for producing arms and ammunition, including rockets for multiple launch rocket systems. Reports indicate that all missiles aimed at the site were successfully intercepted by Russian air defenses. However, debris from at least one intercepted missile fell on the village of Malaya Kamenka, damaging a residential building and sparking a fire. Emergency services responded swiftly, and fortunately, no casualties or injuries were reported. In the Rostov region, remnants of Storm Shadow missiles were discovered, suggesting that this combined attack may have involved both cruise missiles and possibly ATACMS. While some sources remain uncertain about whether both types were employed simultaneously, it is confirmed that Western munitions were used. The Russian Ministry of Defense has yet to issue an official statement, but historically, the ministry has acknowledged the deployment of such Western weapons in attacks against Russian territory. Separately, in the Zaporozhye region, claimed by Russia following recent annexations, the local governor stated that Ukrainian forces attempted to strike residential areas with 4 Storm Shadow missiles. All missiles were intercepted without any reported casualties or damage. Russian air defense systems, including the Pantsir S-1, appear to have operated effectively, minimizing physical destruction and preventing loss of life. From a strategic perspective, these attacks may be less about achieving substantial military gains and more about provoking Russia or securing symbolic media victories. Analysts argue that such strikes are intended to escalate tensions and potentially lure Russia into a disproportionate and reckless response. Others suggest these operations aim to showcase Ukraine's ability to strike deep within Russian territory, thereby bolstering the resolve of Western supporters and demonstrating Kyiv's ongoing resilience despite previous setbacks. Interestingly, these attacks often coincide with President Zelensky's foreign trips, possibly to ensure that any Russian retaliatory measures are timed differently and appear unrelated to his travels. Amid these developments, Russia announced the capture of the alleged perpetrator behind the assassination of General Igor Kirillov, a high-ranking officer who served as the head of Russia's radiological, chemical, and biological defense forces and oversaw nuclear weapons programs. General Kirillov was recently killed in Moscow by a bomb concealed in an electric scooter placed outside his residence. According to Russian authorities, the detained suspect is a 29-year-old Uzbek citizen who has confessed to being recruited by Ukrainian intelligence. The suspect reportedly received training, detailed instructions, and a promised reward of 100,000 monetary units, currency unspecified, potentially euros or dollars, along with a European Union passport. The Russian Federal Security Service, FSB, reported that the suspect not only planted the bomb but also rented a vehicle, installed a Wi-Fi camera, and live-streamed the general's residence to handlers in Dnipro, Ukraine. Escalating tensions in Ukraine, strategic maneuvers, global implications, and a looming crossroads. Reports from Russian authorities detail the meticulous planning involved in the recent assassination of General Igor Kirillov, a key figure in Russia's defense infrastructure. Ukrainian intelligence handlers reportedly monitored the target remotely, using advanced surveillance tools to pinpoint the precise moment when Kirillov exited his residence. This precision allowed them to synchronize the detonation of an explosive device concealed in an electric scooter with devastating accuracy. This level of operational sophistication indicates that the attack was far from improvised. On the contrary, it suggests a broader network of support, potentially involving Western intelligence agencies. The coordination, logistics, and advanced surveillance capabilities required for such an operation point to an intricate web of planning and execution, raising questions about how deeply external actors may be involved in Ukraine's covert actions. Russia's response and the threat of retaliation. Unsurprisingly, the Russian government has reacted with outrage. Senior officials, including Dmitry Medvedev, have issued veiled threats of retaliation, hinting that Western officials or strategists who orchestrate or support such attacks could be deemed legitimate targets. Medvedev's statements reflect a growing narrative within Russia that frames these actions not just as Ukrainian provocations but as direct challenges from NATO and Western allies. If Russia were to act on these threats and target NATO personnel or facilities, it would mark a dangerous escalation, potentially expanding the conflict beyond its current parameters. Such actions could transform what has largely been a proxy war into a direct confrontation between nuclear-armed powers, with unpredictable and catastrophic consequences for global security. The prospect of EU peacekeeping forces in Ukraine. Amidst this volatile backdrop, the European Union and NATO are reportedly discussing the possibility of deploying so-called peacekeeping forces to Ukraine. These troops, ostensibly tasked with stabilizing the region, would represent a significant escalation in Western involvement in the conflict. However, Russia has made its position clear. Any foreign military presence on Ukrainian soil would be considered a direct provocation and a hostile act. The implications of such a deployment are profound. Moscow might interpret the entry of EU forces into Ukraine as an open declaration of war, triggering retaliatory strikes not only within Ukraine but also against the nation's contributing troops. This could lead to a rapid escalation, drawing multiple NATO countries into direct military confrontation with Russia. Historically, peacekeeping missions have been deployed in conflict zones to maintain ceasefires or stabilize post-conflict regions. However, Ukraine's situation is far from conducive to such missions. Unlike previous peacekeeping operations, such as those in Kosovo or the Balkans, Ukraine involves a direct confrontation with Russia, a major nuclear power. The risks associated with even a limited deployment of EU troops are orders of magnitude greater. Strategic and historical context. The roots of the current conflict can be traced back to Ukraine's aspirations to join NATO and the EU, moves that Russia has consistently opposed. For Moscow, Ukraine's integration into Western alliances represents a strategic threat, bringing NATO's military infrastructure closer to its borders. This geopolitical tension, simmering since the end of the Cold War, exploded into open conflict following Russia's annexation of Crimea in 2014 and the subsequent war in eastern Ukraine. The ongoing war has also highlighted the deep divisions within Europe and the West regarding how to handle Russian aggression. While some nations advocate for stronger military support to Ukraine, others fear the potential for escalation. The introduction of peacekeeping forces risks exacerbating these divisions, especially if the operation fails to secure broad consensus among EU member states. Media narratives and the role of information warfare. As the military and diplomatic fronts remain active, the information war plays an equally critical role. International media outlets offer divergent portrayals of the conflict. Western media often depict Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky as a resilient leader fighting for his nation's survival, while Russian outlets frame their actions as defensive measures against NATO encroachment. This battle for public opinion influences not only domestic audiences but also international policymakers. Western nations use these narratives to justify military aid to Ukraine, while Russia seeks to undermine Western unity by highlighting the risks and costs of continued involvement. The Trump factor and hypothetical diplomacy. Adding another layer of complexity is the potential return of Donald Trump to the U.S. presidency. Trump has suggested that, if re-elected, he would engage directly with Russian President Vladimir Putin and Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky to broker a peace deal. While Trump's rhetoric emphasizes a swift end to the bloodshed, many analysts question the feasibility of such an approach. The entrenched positions of both sides, coupled with the high stakes for international security, make any diplomatic resolution challenging. Furthermore, Trump's past interactions with Putin have been controversial, raising doubts about his ability to negotiate an agreement that satisfies all parties. A looming crossroads. As tensions continue to mount, the situation in Ukraine stands at a critical juncture. The potential for further escalation, whether through retaliatory Russian strikes, increased Western involvement, or miscalculated diplomatic efforts, remains alarmingly high. The decisions made in the coming months will not only shape the future of Ukraine, but also determine the trajectory of global stability. The question remains, can international leaders navigate this crisis without plunging the world into a broader conflict? And if figures like Donald Trump or other global leaders attempt to intervene, will their efforts bring peace or merely add fuel to the fire? Let me know your thoughts on this complex and rapidly evolving situation.